to another episode of the Amateur Aerodynamicist, and I'm back with another analysis of my own with Ferrari. After a long time, I think we're still going with Ferrari in this case because their season is the most troublesome so far, and it's the most interesting to dissect because you also get a variety of information for this team. So, what happened so far? Last time we evaluated it, they had rear suspension problems, and they proceeded to bring a suspension update to Spa that had a very tiresome weekend. We saw Lewis Hamilton going out in Q1 twice, having a real lock that we've never seen him do in his career. We saw Charles somehow hold off Max Verstappen, which was fantastic. But other than that, he was not able to make any headway, nothing closer to the McLarens. We were not even close to them in sprint quali, not even in regular quali, not even in the race at all. We were miles off the pace. But in Hungary, Charles Leclerc took a shock pole, and Lewis Hamilton was out in Q2 at one of his best tracks. His track record at Hungary is unbeatable. That's how good he is at that track. The fact is that both the drivers are struggling a lot with the car, and it shows that the car is just not in the right place. It's not the case that one driver can handle it, one can't. It's the case that the car is just acting up very differently for different drivers, and that does happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive deep into why is that the case in this case, and why I think that what is the main reason. And I think I found the gremlin which is leading to all this problem. So what is interesting to note in this case is that they suffer, and not only did Charles get pole, he moved to P4. But important thing to note is that his lap times were good in the first stint. But later we can say that it is strategy. He lost the place, he lost the podium as well. So yeah, P1 to P4, Lewis Hamilton out of the points. First non-point scoring drive for him in a Ferrari. That is without a finish, with a finish. So without a finish, of course, he's got non-points scoring finishes, the SQ in China. But yeah, in a race which is finished, he's always scored points, and Hungary was the first one where he hasn't scored a single point despite finishing the race. So that is one thing to note, not something really good for him or for the team who has made a banker signing. So what is the problem? And this is very interesting. You might get surprised. I think the problem, and I have quite a few reasons to believe why what I think is the actual problem is what we're going to face as a problem is because of one simple reason. It is a very interesting intrinsic part of the car. It lies between the wheelbase, it lies between the steering wheel and in front of the engine. It is this part. Well, my image has completely disappeared, but very interestingly, let's put back what we were having a look at. In this case, it was no, it's not Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton is not the problem. He's not there in both cars. He's in one of the cars. What is the problem, however, for them, for Ferrari, is this part. Now you'll be asking, why is the seat the problem? Why would a seat be a problem? Well, it's not exactly the seat, it's where the seat is placed. Now you might ask, okay, why is seat position such a big thing? Well, think of it like sort of riding a cycle. If you're way too far back and your handlebar is too far ahead, you might have to bend all the way down and you might not have the right point of view, or you might not understand. You might have a very long front, but at the back, if something, when you're going to brake, you're going to get lunged ahead completely. And at the same point, if you are very far ahead, you might completely feel on the nose everywhere. You might feel, okay, if I turn now, I'm going to just turn like this completely. So that is how it would change your driving dynamics. But there's an entire physics element to this which I'm going to add in here. So let's have a look at the positioning compared to last year. So I put both the cars here in this case, the SF-25 and the SF-24. So it's very interesting to note. First of all, let's have a look at both the front tires. You can see that in this case, the SF-25's tires are slightly, very, very slightly ahead as compared to the SF-24's tires. What that means is that you've got a longer wheelbase. Of course, we have to look at the rear tires also to analyze this. And what we can do is simply go all the way to the back and zoom in here. I'll show you how it looks. See, looking right here, you can see that the SF-25's tires are also rear tires a little bit farther away as compared to the SF-24. So overall, what that means is that the SF-25 has a longer wheelbase. Now, because of a longer wheelbase, it does obviously cover more area. That is quite obvious. Given the fact that there is this longer wheelbase of the car, you can also look at some other details which are very interesting. I think need to be looked at in this case. All right. So, one important thing to note, as I was talking about cockpit positioning, is that you can notice that the SF-25's cockpit and the SF-24's cockpit have a very, very slight difference. I mean, it's in centimeters, quite literally. It is. This is the difference. I mean, that's how small it is. Even my smallest pen can't obscure it. That's just how small this part is, like this. That's how it is. And you know how much is the length? How much is the difference that they've done? The difference is a whopping 3 centimeters. That's it. 3 centimeters is how much they've moved the cockpit back. And now you're gonna ask me, okay, how does that unload a complete world of problems? A car that was fighting for the constructor's title goes all the way down to not even fighting for a win and barely making it to the podium. And a seven-time world champion who holds most of the records not able to make it to the podium with this car. Charles Leclerc somehow making podiums when there is nobody, when the McLarens are up there, but nobody else is able to somehow make it, or the pieces just fall apart and Charles makes the podium there. That's the only case where it happens, and Charles grabs a shock pole. But I mean, this car, how can it be such a step down as compared to the earlier years car, which was arguably a lot better, and it was even race winning pace, and at some race it was very dominant as well. So you can't have such big of a change with such small of a offset, right? But actually, I think it's very interesting to note that you actually can. If any of you have been following the Formula One season for a while and the sport, you will know in 2023, Lewis Hamilton drove the W14 with Mercedes, and he kept constantly saying, the cockpit is too far forward, I can't feel the rear, you have to move it a little bit backward, it helps me with the feeling of the rear. And so when he joined Ferrari, one of the things he requested was that the cockpit be a little bit more rearward. Here, yes, his request was complied to, and the cockpit is about 303 centimeters rearward in this case. Now, what did he say? He said that essentially a more rearward cockpit would allow him to understand how the car was actually gauging to his input, so he would have a better view, have a better feeling of the car overall, and also have a good feeling of how the rear is going to be, how the rear is going to lose grip. So he would sort of get that feeling in his body. That is what he said. Now, aerodynamically, also you look at it, okay, the farther you have your car, okay, let's just have a simple drawing here. Assume these are your wheels. Okay, assume these are your wheels. Assume this is where you're sitting. If instead of sitting here, you sit here, right? It frees up this much space for working on aero, because remember, unobstructed aero is always the front. It's near the tires. The further ahead you are, the more unobstructed your aero will be, the more usable that aero will be. So it frees up more space for aerodynamics, also because remember, they have changed to a new suspension system for the front this year. That would also help them with exploration of that. And Aero's entire job in today's day and age is to clean up air. So move away dirty air, have clean air flow into the floor, and generate the downforce. Move dirty air outboard, make wake air move outboard, channel air through the underside into the vortex generators, into the floor, into the venturi tunnels, and out of the diffuser as downforce. That is a very simple way of putting how you do your downforce generation and everything. That is how air works. That is what aerodynamics in this particular reg set would mean. But more space ahead of the cockpit would essentially help with controlling of the turbulent airflows and the wake that comes from the car ahead, and in the front wheel that is fed to the front wheels. And the entire airflow would be cleaned when you feed the underflow, because you have more area, you can work more with the air, you can play around with it, right? But one thing that was not really considered is that when you move that cockpit rearward, it means, let's take a center of gravity drawing right now. Okay, this is a very, very rudimentary center of gravity drawing. It's a coffin style. Okay, assume this is the center. Here lies my center of gravity. This is in a balanced state. Now, when you're not in a balanced state, your cockpit moves rearward. It means, remember, The person is also sitting there. The entire weight of the car would move towards the rear. So this is the rear, this is the front. I'm just making that clear right now itself. So this is the rear, this is the front. RNF. Here is my guy sitting. Now Lewis says move the cockpit backward. Team does what he says, moves the cockpit backward. What this means is that the balance of the car that was earlier like this, probably equal more or less with a little deviation, becomes sort of like this. And what that means is that here, look, in this case, if there is a quick stop and this moves down, this might go up a bit, this might bounce a bit. In this case, if this is suddenly pushed down, because remember the distance is also more here, in this case, in this case, this part, the distance is also more, assuming it's a seesaw. Okay, this thing will get thrown off. In this case, the distance is lesser, the chance of it getting thrown off is lesser. Why? It is still there, it's there, but it's lesser. So you will see the difference between this and this is quite a good bit, right? So that is one tangible explanation. Because the center of gravity was moved rearward, your rear has more bias. So when you brake, your it's like you're carrying a very heavy bag and the entire thing lunges upon you, right? The entire thing just pushes upon you. It's like you're in a line, right? And suddenly someone from the back just pushes and like way back, and they just push really strongly and they just stop, like, and they push you and they push the entire line pushes ahead, lunges ahead. That's what it's essentially going to be like. It creates a very rear biased weight distribution of the car, and it's concentrated towards the rear. That is what creates your rear imbalance issues. Because remember, the rear of the car has a lot of things. This part of the car has so many things. I mean, you can't even begin to count. You have the PU, you have the gearbox, you have the fuel, you have the fuel tank, you have your electronics, you have your hydraulics. You have so many parts here that are heavy, and that just exacerbates the entire problem altogether in this case. So it is quite understandable that why the SF-25 has been very poor out of rear and medium speed corners, because it's here where you really need, the rear to actually be felt and not really lunge. Because when you're in a slow speed corner, you will be slowing down a lot from a very high speed. So if your back just overwhelms you, your rear overwhelms you, you won't be able to take that corner at a very confident speed. As I said, you'll just get thrown off. As is in this case, this is what you're working with a rear bias, and that is the problem here. So that is what is primarily the problem. And when you brake, the weight shift forwards, and given the concentration of weight over the rear axle, the balance weight is way too significant, and that becomes very uncomfortable for drivers, as I've been trying to explain. And the instability under heavy braking is like way too obvious this year, honestly. So that is one thing that I really want to bring up. And it is the seating position is not going to change everything, but it is going to create a very different feeling. As Lewis said, it creates a different feeling. But because you have to compensate this, you are moving it even more backward. Now the thing is, Lewis has not sat in an old Ferrari. Lewis would have requested this considering that he was at Mercedes. But Mercedes, he was there in a car that was actually quite forward. So from Mercedes, he asked Ferrari that, make a car with a slightly rearward seat. Maybe Ferrari was in the right optimum position of the seat that he would have wanted. But then they went on to move it even rearward, which kind of made it worse. Because look, realistically, the development of the SF-25, when did it start? Development of the SF-25 started in 2024, and Lewis Hamilton was not at Ferrari, but he would have communicated his wishes to Fred. And he has not obviously driven the older Ferrari cars because he was not allowed to. So he was only allowed to drive it when he actually joined the team in 2025. And by that time, to change the seating position, it's very late because the chassis and monocoque is designed and put into production long ago. So you can't even consider that in this case. Secondly, we're talking about fuel in this case, so let's go to the gearbox, gear casing, and everything, because this is also another part I think which we need to look at. So this is your fuel. This is how a fuel tank of an F1 car essentially looks like. You've got an FIA regulated fuel flow meter. People who have followed this sport before 2020 know there was a massive problem with regards to this particular part, with regards to this particular team as well. I'm not going to talk more about that, but yeah, there are two meters. One is the FIAs, one is the teams. There is one case of a lift of fumes, and there is the collector, obviously. Now the fuel tank is usually just behind the driver. It is right behind the seat in this case, and the when the cockpit moves back, obviously the fuel entire assembly will also move back. The fuel tank will move backwards, and all of this, remember, you have a limit on the wheelbase. You can do have a limit on the size of the car. You have to squirm it in a certain amount of space, and so they have repositioned and redesigned it entirely. So we don't know how it looks like at the present moment, but definitely there has been some compromise made in this case, which has caused it to not be quite compliant with regards to this car. Moreover, you have short you the easiest way would be you just shorten the width. In this case, you shorten this part and you lengthen this part, so you make it vertically longer and you laterally you slim it down. That is the simplest way of doing this thing. Okay, so that is what they did, assumably. And further in, you I have already talked about the rear suspension. I'll link the video below, you can have a look at that definitely. And I'll just show you the diagram. Simply put, your gear casing being too soft would have caused the rear suspension to flex a lot more, which would have caused your plank wear. Your plank wear would have caused a DSQ. Hence, you would have to run the car at a higher ride height, so that even with the flex, you don't get that much plank wear, because your car is not that low to even have plank wear. With a harder gear casing, they would have probably reduced the flex a little bit. But yeah, simply put, this is the gear case problem. I have gone into depth in it, so going into it again is a futile use. And lastly, we've got to look at one very very interesting thing. I feel is that we have to look at some important points of deltas. We've taken two races here. In this case, we've taken the Bahrain Grand Prix, taken the Austrian Grand Prix. Two races where the drivers were fairly evenly matched on pace in the race and were actually performing at a similar level. You will have noticed that both drivers say the car came alive, and they will always say this is in the middle of the race. It would never be ending well, it would never be starting well, it would always be in this part. They are very, very happy with the car, right? I'll erase that because it looks like a graph, but yeah, they are very, very happy with the car in this particular part of the race, that is the middle stint. They're very happy with it. Now, why is that? This is very interesting to note. All right, so when the fuel tank is half empty, the smallest distance arm that is there between the center of gravity and your center of the car, that is your design center of the car, would have been least in terms of the yaw, right? So because of that, what would happen is that you would have a low roll and a better center of gravity in practice. Now it's very hard to visualize this, but think of it as something like a balance. It's like at this point they've got medium fuel, so they will have a lower ride height, which would give them a little bit of more downforce, because the car would be flexing a little bit more. The car would be able to push a little bit more, right? In this case, they would be able to make the car work a little more agile way as well. So if the car is more agile, they can push it around, but the car is also having enough fuel that it keeps it stable and not very lumpy. Now, because the fuel is also reduced, while at the same point the grip level and the car performance is getting better with regards to the fuel going down and making it, less of a weight that pushes on the driver. Because of this, it sort of falls into the sweet spot there, that it's got just about enough fuel to give the car some stability, but also just about enough fuel that it also makes the car lighter and not much of a problem breaking into slow and medium corners. Because remember, Bahrain is full of slow corners. You have turn 9, you have medium speed corners. You don't really have high speed corners in Bahrain, barring sector 2. Sector 2 is the only place where you get high speed corners as such, and there's that one turn in sector 3, but you don't even consider that a high speed corner as such. So what's interesting to note is that it's this middle part of the race where it really falls into a sweet spot, and this is where it gets sort of close to McLaren, but that's about it. It can't get anywhere near it in an entire race distance. So that sort of concludes my analysis for this. So there are a few main problems that need to be addressed. Of course, there's no use making any changes for this year because, well, the reg set is over. what they need to understand is that they need to have a proper technical leadership team. Like, they have good people in technical leadership. Okay, Ferrari has some great people. They need to be able to organize them well. They need to give them autonomy. Most importantly, they need to understand that, businessmen don't run F1. Businessmen are not meant to be technical designers, so don't take decisions from them. Take it from technical people, and that is how you're only going to be able to grow this team. And that is what I feel they should do. Technically, they need to be a little bit more aware and not just take words, even if it's coming out of a 7-time world champion's mouth. Take it, understand it, think of it logically, and then you make the decision. Just don't jump to everything a person says. As simple as that. And I don't think Ferrari needs words from someone like me. I think they have a lot of good people inside. That's why I said. But the problem is they're too up in their own heads, and sometimes a stumble will actually help them understand. And I hope, both drivers raise their voices towards this. And I think they will. I think next year could have something better, or it could be just about the same. So that's it for today. Thank you guys for watching the amateur aerodynamicist. I'll be back soon. Bye bye.